If you don't know me, I'm Chad Wasser. I'm the field supervisor at Artech. Hello. There's very few of us, as you see, so feel free to, at any moment, interrupt me. You can raise your hand or do whatever, but this should be more of a discussion since we're all experts, except for me. All right. So I was planning on talking about problems with storage, primarily earthquake mitigation. Since it's a problem that's often overlooked here in the Northwest, our earthquakes are kind of few and far between. And when they happen, they can be really bad if we haven't prepared for them at all. So we'll get into just kind of simple things we can do and ways we can take advantage of situations like loans or like moves to make some upgrades. And I have some examples we'll talk about, but a lot of what we're talking about is kind of in the storage space, so there's not a lot of examples, so we'll do the best we can. The basic problems when designing an art storage facility or dealing with what you have is you want to maintain the density of your items, obviously, because we all have limited space. You want to maintain movement and accessibility of those objects, but you also obviously want to keep them very safe. So ideally, they have some kind of housing. They're not densely packed side by side by side, but whatever you have around them should be minimal. It should be of suitable material. And it should be, if your storage is not climate controlled, it should in some way mitigate any of those needs. So we can talk a little about that. We can just get to some housing stuff. So everything in your storage should be tied down. If it's not, it should have a lip or some way to keep it from rolling off the shelf. It's good to look at your building as a series of links, and the object is the final link, but in the event that everything is shaking, whatever your weakest link is what you should address. If everything's tied to your rack, but your rack's not bolted down, then your whole rack could fall over. And so, if most of us are using pallet racks, I've been in a lot of storage here. We're using pallet racks or baker's racks or large racks, space savers. All those have building codes that are required, and if yours have not been put into code, you should maybe revisit that. There's a length of bolt that's required to go into the ground. There's a foundation base that's required. And in the event of a seismic event, if that's not properly done, it can be, there's videos on YouTube, you can see what happens. It's really bad. And then a difference in art handling on the West Coast versus the East Coast is the idea of holding things down. And you see that a lot with our mounts, but it's true in storage also. Unless there's just a spill catcher, the idea of holding it down to the deck, either with a band down or a batten across it, is a way to keep things from hopping or flying. Sometimes the shelves on the storage rack are not actually secured down. They're sat in a rabbet in the racks, and those can move too. So just kind of, I mean, we all might have different racks, but look comprehensively at what the rack unit is, what the material is. If it's particle board that the deck is made out of, that can wave. Well, so let's start talking about work on display, because it's a lot easier, and then we'll talk about storage solutions. There's a few ways to hold down sculptural work in the gallery, and it depends a lot. All of you have different sorts of objects, and also different conservational requirements. So we'll talk about the really cheap and dirty ways first, which your conservators might freak out about, but that's the use of, here's some quake wax, which this is the one we have in the shop. It's kind of used. We just apply it with an old security clip, but it's really thick. It's really tacky, and if you have a climate-controlled showroom, it works really well. If you put something in the sun or if you put it in a window, this will just run out of the way and not work. But it's good stuff for sealed glazed ceramics, smooth glass, things that don't have pores. Don't put this on wood-fired ceramic. It'll never come out. Don't put it on wood. But it's a good way. You just put it on the bottom of the item and kind of set it down. It's not the best thing. We also at Artech will, in the same way, use dental wax. It's the same wax you put on your braces, which you order this from an orthodontist supplier. But what's nice about it is it comes in these sheets that look like this. And so you can just kind of peel off a cord, and if you have a base, you can just kind of snake it around the bottom of the base. And again, just for things that are sealed, metal, glass, but you know, you stick it down. For heavier duty stuff, we use silicone. This has to be removed with, you know, the mechanical force. Again, not for, these are the cheap and dirty ways to hold things down, but this will really hold something down. Make sure it's 100% silicone if you use it. Outside of that, though, you're looking at securing it to the deck in some way, and that's going to be a mount or a through bolt. Corey, what's that? Well, there's museum gel.
No, there's Rolex. Museum glass uses.
There, yeah, okay. Also, non-porous surfaces.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's kind of fun because you make little dots on wax paper, and then you just use a little dental tool to pick up the dots and put them on it. But it
right.
comes
And
out
you can just
really
scrape it off.
clean.
Yeah. Only on glass? What do you think?
I've only used it on glass there. I don't know about other surfaces. But.
Right. I mean, museum glass has an interesting problem where they have a lot of uniquely contoured things. They can't be mounting all those, and so a solution like that is a really efficient way to do it.
It worked best for small works. Sometimes you still needed silicone if it was something with a heavy, with a really small base.
Right. Yeah. If you have a massive shelf, you know, with 100 objects.
Yeah.
The idea of siliconing them all down would be a nightmare. And so the problem I see with all these things is not that it wrecks the object, because usually we're pretty careful about that, but that it wrecks the deck you stick it to. Someone will be really careful and adhere their Chihuly to their beautiful wooden deck with silicone, and that wooden deck is basically ruined at that point. I mean, you can sand it out, but you have to refinish it. This stuff is very, I mean, it's how you put the corners of aquariums together, so it's really strong. Tessa?
We just mentioned orange oil since you're talking about silica.
For removing it?
Yeah, because
yeah.
it makes it so much easier.
Yeah, I mean,
natural, so.
It's, yeah, you can use orange oil, or you can use the Touch of Orange's cabinet cleaner also. It just works as a release. You have to clean that off sometimes because it leaves it real slick, but yeah, so if these don't work for you, which they very well may not, then you're talking about a mount situation, or at least securing it to the deck. If you go, well, whatever. What happens here on the West Coast is it's a 3-point hold usually, where you're holding it in both directions, but you're also holding it down. And that's unique because on the East Coast, it's really just about tipping, something bumping into the pedestal or vibration of the building. And the idea of holding it down is very complicated for the mount design. It usually means you have to, in the case of an object like this, actually go up to the first point you can hold it down. So what you see a lot is maybe a contoured line of a fishing line or something like that. You get a lot of cost with that extra access you have to hold it down, because you could just have a grip mount on the bottom here, but that wouldn't be sufficient. If you're mounting to the deck, then you're going to want to secure your pedestal to the floor, either through the use of ballast, weight, or through bolting it. There's some ADA compliance issues there where you want to make sure that your pedestals leave wide enough. If you're going to secure them down, they're really hard to move, so make sure you leave wide enough aisles and everything. So you don't get there. A base isolator is a 3-tiered platform that has tracks running in multiple directions. And the Getty uses them so that in the event of a large earthquake, the earth moves underneath your massive object. So it really works for mass objects that have some mass. If you use it for smaller objects, you should put ballast on the top. But you can see in this paperwork a seismic event, and then how that seismic event reads on the base isolator. They need to be engineered custom for the weight of the object and the size of the footprint. Artech has some experience installing them. We've done it a couple times up here, but they are very expensive. And they are object specific. And so you can't just put one in your pedestal and put any old thing in there. It's based on the weight.
So that would allow it to travel in like...
The idea is the object doesn't move. If you think about an earthquake where the earth is moving, you know, objects at rest tend to stay at rest. So the idea is the earth will move and the object will stay there and the earth will move underneath it. So it'll have the illusion of moving, but it's actually the earth that's moving. And you can, there is that seismic test where it divides it by like 10 hours earthquake. You still need a mount though. The very basic way to secure things in storage we're all familiar with, which is this use of contoured foam blocks. It kind of works, right? These are all different contours. I don't know if these will work, but you know, you just put like 4 of those around that, and you kind of sort of works. Or maybe I don't know, maybe you do something. This is how a lot of yeah, you know, right? But you always get that problem where you're bending it around or something, and what it ends up doing is kind of taking up more space than you'd like, and the foam blocks can still move, and it actually holds the object standing pretty well, but in the event of everything moving, these can slide on the deck, especially if you have Tyvek wrapped, smooth shelves or foam wrapped shelves.
Are those wrapped foam?
These are Tyvek wrapped. This is not.
Oh,
yeah, they're fancy. If you put the cut edge of Ethafoam against something, you should kind of, they're fancy. So the next cheapest or easy solution, which is really common for an object like this, would just be either a polyfill or an Ethafoam ring. This is a tube I made out of soft Tyvek and just tied up with some twill tape. And I can untie it and unroll it, but you just kind of put this in here like that. And that's pretty secure. And what's good about it is you can reuse these. It's just a tube, right? I just tied it up with, but it's just polyfill, it's just polyester fill. It's really easy to just pull some out, stick some more in there, make it bigger, make it smaller. You could put a couple on this and make it really happy. It's really soft, but they're reusable. So, if I have an object like this Christmas tree, the next easiest way to stabilize it would just be in something like a tray. And there's this little thing in here. But trays are great. I know you all use trays. But the nice thing about trays is you can treat it kind of like a box. I mean, you can stack things right next to each other. You can actually almost pressure fit them on the shelf. You can tie them in without having to touch the object.
You put an adhesive label on it.
Yeah, right. You can label them. Without having to label this is an extremely fragile, whatever, fancy surface. This is a martini glass I broke. This would be kind of a more basic idea. There's no lip, so it's not as great, but you can still adhere a label. If you wanted, you could even screw it down to the deck. It's just this is a piece of coroplast that has a contoured Ethafoam thing just to hold this top of martini glass. It's harder to tie this in, but you could still secure it. I mean, ideally, the front of your you'll actually have trays or drawers that hold the whole shelf, so it still contains something like that. This is basically this tray, same thing, and this is not okay to ship this way, but this is just a sponge. This is really reusable too.
Did you make the box?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
It's very fancy, right? Yeah, so you just make a big plus and glue it together. But if you're making boxes, it's very handy to make them all the same size. Then you can stack them or you can arrange them. If you're not making boxes, they'll probably come all the same size. It would be super great if it could be an inner box for a crate, because that will save you at that time. So this one is a little bit, it's not really okay to ship yet. It's not quite there. You could do a little bit to get it there, but it could be a little better if you're going to go that way. It's also taking up kind of a lot of space for how big this is. Really nice. This is heritage board also, not blue board. If you guys are familiar with heritage board.
How do you tell the difference?
No, what is
That's a really great question.
Tell us what heritage board is.
Yeah, so blue board is kind of this is blue board. I even know it's gray. It's just sort of the older standard. Heritage board is it's a brand name, but it's white on one side. There's some discussion that this pigment can transfer to some objects. So I don't know. So heritage board, it comes from Talus, comes from a few other manufacturers. You can get it in single, double, or triple thickness. But it's just a cardboard. I mean, but it's what we typically use at Artech is heritage board.
What was your point when you were saying if you make a custom box, you want to make it so it'll go in a crate?
Well, if you have a housing for an object, and there's any chance that object will ever go on loan, you're going sort of halfway with some cost and not quite all the way. If in the future you're going to have a new housing made. If it's an object, so you could retrofit this. You could obviously just repack it here a little bit better. But how this is right now isn't ready to ship. I mean, there's no top on it. I know it's a subtle thing.
But you have a lid.
I do have a lid, but there's nothing holding that object down in there.
So going all the way is adding more.
Going all the way would be, I mean, I would at least have a topper on that traps that in there.
Cavity pack, is that what you mean? Like
maybe a cavity pack.
Cavity pack.
Here's maybe an example of a housing that's made for storage. That's also good for shipping.
Oh my god.
if you are having something created and it needs an inner box,
Yeah.
it's a nice idea to maybe put your foot down about the materials used for the inner box. So I mean, I know loans are funny because oftentimes you're not the one paying for the loan that's coming out of your museum, it's someone else. But let's all get together here, because what's nice about this is you could actually just have that as your shelf support, and you could store this in offsite storage if you don't have the space for it. But you could also store it here. These are completely fine materials to store an object like this. I mean, you want to be careful about small microclimates and all the fancy words, but this could easily go into a crate and it's fine. I mean, this thing, you could ship it like this via Art Shuttle, and then it could store. So it's a cost that's worth looking at. We all have paintings. This is a certificate of achievement I've put into a tray, but the tray has a lid, and I can increase my painting density storage like this if I actually put little housings around them. You don't want to seal them in plastic necessarily, but here I've given myself a place to label it, and I can stack these pretty tightly together, and this can be used as an inner box also. It can also just be used as a tray in a crate.
Just for glazed things?
This would be for framed things primarily. It doesn't have to be glazed, but it does have to be framed. I wouldn't put an unframed object in a tray like this. I would put it more in a travel frame. There. There's a big travel frame. Where you're actually screwing it in. And you can do it for storage, or some of you have high density painting racks, you can just hang it. But yeah, if you're gonna actually be resting the object and trapping it on the face, ideally there's a frame. You're not doing that to the work. A note on high density painting racks. I'm gonna draw a picture, because catastrophe can happen with these. If you have a bunch of things, 2D objects hung on expanded metal, and they're not connected to the metal, they're just on hangers, and you had a large earthquake event, think about what will happen to your paintings, where they basically all wind up at the bottom in between the racks when they fall off, and to pull the racks out, it's really bad. So the easy, really quick solution is to zip tie the D-rings to the expanded metal on your pieces, and that will keep them basically down so they don't hop up and off. It's really cheap. It's 2 zip ties per piece usually.
Instead of using S-hooks?
Well, yeah, you're going to hang it on the S-hooks. That's going to take the weight. But to keep the S-hooks from hopping off the metal in the event of an earthquake, just zip tie the D-rings straight to the metal. So you do have to cut it to remove it. Basically, every time you move that painting, you go through 2 zip ties. This, don't worry, this is a new plunger, is an example of a housing, which is this is actually kind of a common housing that I see made, these 3-sided boxes. They're kind of nice, but this one has some problems, and we're going to talk about what's wrong about this one and how it could have been so much better by just being a little different. One is it's not really okay to ship as it is. This isn't held down in any way. 2 is the object doesn't really sit here very well. This is kind of, a lot of people view this as like a one-size-fits-all, where you just put it in a, you have these things made and then you just build them object by object. But the biggest thing, and you'd be surprised how common this is that the object sticks above the top of this. And when you're putting it on a shelf, like the most common thing is you hit the shelf above it. Like really, I've seen it happen a lot. And so just this extra inch would have been everything, because the most fragile part of this ancient plunger is this top. So that's something, I mean, just when building housings, look at what the actual risk is. And the actual risk in the case of tall objects going on off of shelves is the overheight of the shelf. And so like literally another 3/4 of an inch in height here would have been level with that. Another 1 inch would be much more comfortable. And would also enable you to put a lid on it and make this something good for packing. But this would be hard to retrofit to be used inside a crate, and it is this big wooden structure and it takes up a lot of room. It's kind of heavy, so it's okay, it looks nice, but it's not maybe the best housing for this plunger. Rolled paintings are a problem sometimes, because you don't necessarily want to sit them like this anyway, because you get flat spots. You can hang them. If you hang them, it's best to hang them held on the end so they're not going to be swinging in the event of a swing. Imagine this is big. But I mean, what we do occasionally is we'll just make little things like this, which can be interchangeable. If you imagine this is a 10-inch sonotube, this can be a lot bigger. But this way you can actually put it on a shelf, and you can secure those down. You can label those, and if those are secured, this can move a little bit. But it's, you know, it's allowed to. You know, I've sort of cradled it with the Tyvek, so it's not supposed to drape in there, hang out on the bottom, and it should be happy. If you have a lot of rolled textiles, you're probably looking at a system. I mean, you're probably looking at like a wooden system that's like this but much taller, where you can just kind of stack them up in there. Again, it's like kind of with boxes, it's nice if all your rolls are the same length and you're just putting smaller textiles on them so you can use the same fixtures again and again. That eliminates the ability of using these inside crates, but it keeps your storage a little denser.
Is anybody here suspended one from the ceiling?
I'm sorry?
Suspending one from the ceiling?
Yeah, I mean, that's done. So there's.
I just wonder if anyone's done that. Okay.
There's funny theories about textiles, and people get out of control with them. But if you have massive paintings, say a 50-foot by 50-foot painting that's rolled up, there's some thought that, let me draw a bigger picture. Sorry, I don't have a whiteboard, so I'm going to draw pictures. You basically get a lot of pressure on the top where all the canvas pushes together, and you can get stretching on the sides where the bottom wants to pull out if you've suspended it for a long duration and it's super heavy. So what some people have done, some museums, is build basically tube-long hammocks where you hang it from the tube and you also support the base with a hammock. And it's supposed to keep it from sagging on the bottom. Well, not holding it from the bottom and making a pressure spot. You're holding the weight here and you're keeping it from sagging, which is supposed to alleviate the stretching and the pressure. It gets elaborate, but if you have a painting like that, it's probably your one big painting like that. That's a real problem. So it's worth kind of maybe looking at. So let's talk about tying things in. Do you all have really, really fancy Viking cabinets to keep everything? Okay, so there's a lot of hardware you can use. We don't need to talk about the hardware, but I like hardware. We use pallet racks at Artech because we're super fancy. And pallet racks have a lot of advantages. You can put a ton of weight on them. The crossbars lock in, so you can keep them from hopping out. They can be high density, kind of as high density as you want. They're really flexible. But they're not great to tie things in because they're 4-foot deep shelves for the most part, and their links can be pretty long. There are cargo netting systems made for them that actually connect to the pallet racks, and they keep things from falling off. But it's still a good idea to stabilize things inside. Here's just a couple ties. This is a synthetic rope. This is twill tape on heavy objects. This is what we call mule tape. It's somewhere in between your standard nylon webbing and rope. It doesn't tie knots very well. But what the point is here is look at your weight. If you have a giant concrete object, don't tie it in with twill tape, because I've seen that. And maybe it's all you have, but it's kind of an expensive material it won't hold it. Don't even tie it in with rope, tie it in with nylon strapping or something appropriate. And then if you do use hardware like this, make sure it's going in either through the metal of the vertical in the pallet rack or into something like 3/4 inch ply, something that will hold the weight. Imagine that this goes like this and takes the weight of your object. And so you need to think of it basically in terms of installing the piece. When you're looking for that really heavy object, the lower on the rack, the better, obviously, because when it starts to go like that, you don't want the weight up top. Two-dimensional work. It's when it's in storage, it's usually in painting racks, which are supported on either side, or it's in high-density racks. I talked about the zip ties. When it's installed in a gallery, I think everyone's doing this, but think of it as connecting it to the wall, and that's typically it's either a cleat with security hardware on the bottom, or a full security system, or it's at least on 2 points so it can move and those points are clasped. The risk of hopping off is really high, especially if something's on a single wire or a single point, because any kind of movement can be translated and can bounce like that. So I mean, we hang on dual stirrups And if you have two stirrups on a painting, when it starts to move, it tends to level, but it moves a lot more than if there's a single wire, where it'll just slide like that and go like that and fall off. So stirrups are really good, and then going into a class that actually has some spring steel in it. There are pre-made clips. You can also just make, manufacture. We use bent D-rings to just keep the wire on. If something is on a cleat, you can screw it in on the side. If something's really heavy, you should just install it to the wall, either with angle iron or, and that's just a safety thing. But, so we talked some about materials too, since we're talking about housings. Does everyone here know what Tyvek is? Tyvek comes in two kinds. There's smooth Tyvek, and there's what's called hard Tyvek, or, well, hard and smooth, I guess, is the same. There's soft Tyvek. So there's two things. Soft Tyvek, which I have here, and that's what everything is wrapped in, and there's hard Tyvek, which would be house wrap. You can get it without the words on it. They're both good. They're both non-woven DuPont products. They don't stretch. Supposedly they are a vapor barrier in one direction only, but don't think of them like that. But they're very soft. They can get, if you use them up against stone or something like rough, they can get a little burred. But it's kind of a forever thing that'll be with us in the landfills. It's a nice product though. Anyway, this is marble seal, which this crate here is lined in. This is what the inside looks like. Marble seal is a vapor barrier. It's really neat for making microclimates, but it also makes microclimates, so don't just use it willy-nilly, because you'll seal stuff in. You should be monitoring climate if you're making tiny microclimates, but you can make really quick bags by ironing it to itself. This crate is lined, and if it's going somewhere, if you had like a delicate wood object in here, you wanted to monitor humidity, basically making a vapor barrier there. It's cool stuff. It comes in multiple thicknesses. This is the thickest because we usually use it in this use, but you can get it in really, really thin material. And that first number changes. This is marble seal 420. I think it's 360 to 80, something as it gets thinner and thinner and thinner. And you just iron it to itself. The back has nylon on it, which is actually this matte side. The shiny side is the outside. So the nylon melts and it sticks to itself. And you should be working with a conservator if you're using marble seal, because there's usually some kind of relative humidity you want to maintain with silica gels or whatnot.
Oh, and is that just laid against and pressed against? Or
We actually iron it on.
You iron that?
Yeah, you stick it with heat. So this is all done with a household iron. Because it's a vapor barrier, some people will actually stick it on with something like Samalfa or spray adhesive, a non-archival material, because it's kept on the outside. That's it's probably fine. I mean, we iron it just because, especially if it's small like this, it's pretty quick to do. We iron it all the panels of the crate before it's assembled, assemble it, and then do these corner treatments. And then, your only vapor gap would really be the gasket closure, and you realistically can't get away from that.
Can you talk about E-tracks?
Yeah.
Because I want to look into those.
Yeah, so
for a temporary storeroom, we have things in there. And yeah, what do we do in an earthquake? We've got a wall. We can't attach it to anything unless we have something like that.
Right, so I'm going to draw a picture here and you're going to be really proud of how good it looks. Yeah,
It's like inside your truck?
It's in panel trucks.
that,
It looks like this, and it receives these spring clips, these D-rings. Stuff's really cheap, and it's really, usually these are set 2 or 3 inches apart. There's no screw holes, you just screw it wherever you want, you connect the studs. We've put it on the walls all over our warehouse to hold crates up, because it's really sturdy.
Is it like a Home Depot type of item? Or
We order it from Granger, which is more of an industrial product supplier.
Okay.
You can get it online too. It's expensive to get it shipped because it comes in 8-foot links typically, but you can get it all sorts of places locally, and it's a truck supply. But it's really cool. You can put it on the floor. You can put it vertically, and then the way you can get D-rings or you can get hard attachments that just clip into it. You can also look at just getting some bowl rings like this that you can tie in every direction to. but these are not movable. So what's nice about the E-Track is that it's really flexible. You can have an 8-foot length that has something every 2 inches on it, but you want to put that where it's needed, because sometimes, I mean, what we do at Artech is we'll put a 2-foot section on one side of the wall and a 2-foot section on the other side of the wall, since you're almost never tying to the center of the wall. So rather than running a section all the way across the wall,
just put
a piece there and a piece there, and then you've gotten a lot more coverage out of much less track.
Oh, so in case you want to lean something against the wall, not have that texture there, you still have some smooth wall?
It's very rare that we tie something and tie something. And usually we're just, so if the stack of paintings or a crate, we'll just tie the ends.
Yeah.
And you need a little bit of flexibility there, but not a ton. The other thing is, it's a good idea to put them at multiple heights. We
Yeah.
stack them 3 high, because you always want to tie essentially as high as you can. But your lowest paintings will be way too low to tie your tallest paintings in. So
Okay.
a stack of 3, maybe 2.5 or 3 feet apart, 2 feet
Like in
long.
the truck.
I'm sorry?
Isn't it like that inside the trucks?
Yeah,
It's like, right, that's how trucks do it, yeah.
Yeah.
And some trucks do have them in the floor, which is nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's real cheap. Granger is where we get it.
Okay.
And you can just cut it with a hacksaw.
But then the clippy things to go into it, what do you?
The clippy things you get wherever you get the E-Track.
Okay.
And those, there's not really a way around it. You have to buy the ones they make. Because the webbing, it's that super thick webbing that you really can't sew yourself.
Like a seat belt.
It's like thicker than a C-belt. It's super strong. Yeah, and they make a few. They make a D-ring, they make an O-ring. It depends a lot on what your clasp is that you're using. The D-rings don't work real well with webbing, wide webbing, because it pinches at the tip. So the circular rings are a little better.
I was wondering about carts. Do people have locks on their wheels on their carts, or do they
Yes.
just put bumpers?
It's a good idea to get the wheels that lock both the rotation and the orientation, which is kind of the more standard. The side pivot locks, the cheaper ones, only stop it from rolling but don't stop it from moving. And that's less ideal because the cart can like switch direction and because its wheels will bind. But yeah, locks are better than wheel chocks. The best would be a lock and then actually tying your cart to the wall. And I know it seems like overkill, but if you have E-Track, you can actually screw the D-rings to the carts, and that way you just have to have a short little connection to the E-Track. And that way you don't even need locks. I mean, you can leave it unlocked and it won't go anywhere, but it definitely won't fall over.
It's better if it locks though.
It is better if it locks. We've been upgrading all our tables and our carts to locking wheels. And we still tie them to the racks.
But not the kind of, how do they lock? They don't, they're not just the ones you step on.
It's the ones you step on, but
Oh, but it's a.
it's not the side lock.
Yeah.
I mean, let me draw another very crude picture. There's like the cheaper old ones that are on the
Right.
side, that's like the on and the off, and that usually just locks the rotation. And then the newer ones that, they click like this, but they actually put a spring clamp down on the wheel and they lock the bearing from moving. And you've seen them around. You might not even realize they're locking the bearing, but they do. And they're a lot nicer. They're expensive. If you're gonna lock the wheels, it's good to do at least 2. I'm Chad Wasser, field supervisor at Artech. We have all this great food still.
Yeah.
Don't go anywhere.
Thank you, Chad.
Thanks so